"Don't touch her," Ethan Carlisle said, and the quiet authority in his voice froze the entire marble staircase. Moments earlier, the entrance to the Grand Atlantic Hotel had been a blur of black tuxedos, sparkling gowns, and camera flashes from New York's most expensive charity gala of the year. A soft autumn wind rolled down Madison Avenue, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the faint scent of roasted chestnuts from a street cart half a block away. Inside the ballroom, donors were bidding six figures on paintings and vintage watches, but outside, beneath the golden canopy lights, something far more unexpected had just stopped the night cold. Two security guards had been moving a homeless woman and her two children away from the front steps, their voices low but firm, the kind of routine moment no one ever paid attention to in a city this large. The woman stood there in a thin gray coat that looked 2 sizes too big, her dark hair tucked beneath a worn knit cap. One small child clung to her left hand, another to her right. Their sneakers were scuffed, their jackets mismatched, and their eyes wide from the brightness of the lights and the unfamiliar crowd. It was the kind of scene people glanced at for half a second before turning back to their champagne glasses. But Ethan Carlisle didn't glance and move on. He had just stepped out of a sleek black sedan, the kind that cost more than most Manhattan apartments did for a year, when the scene caught his attention. At first it was just movement, then the angle of the woman's face beneath the streetlight. And then the world seemed to narrow into a single breath. Naomi. The name hit him like a memory he had spent years pretending didn't exist. Naomi Brooks. The woman who had once laughed with him on a tiny fire escape in Brooklyn, sharing dollar slices of pizza at 2 a.m. The woman who had vanished from his life 8 years earlier without a word. For a moment Ethan didn't move. Around him the gala continued as if nothing had happened. A photographer shouted instructions to a couple posing near the red carpet. A valet jogged past carrying a guest's coat. Somewhere inside the ballroom a string quartet was playing a soft arrangement of an old jazz song. But Ethan's eyes were locked on the woman standing at the edge of the steps. One of the guards had gently taken her elbow, guiding her toward the sidewalk. "Sir, the event entrance is for guests only," the guard said politely, unaware that the man who had just stepped forward owned half the building through an investment group. Ethan barely heard him. His attention was on the two children now peeking out from behind the woman's coat. The older one, maybe 7 or 8 years old, had dark hair and cautious eyes. The younger, a little girl who couldn't have been older than 5, clutched a small stuffed rabbit with one ear bent sideways. The sight sent a strange, unfamiliar tightness through Ethan's chest. Naomi turned slightly, as if sensing the shift in the air, and their eyes met. For a split second neither of them spoke. Her expression changed first, shock, then something deeper, something like fear mixed with disbelief. "Ethan," she whispered, barely louder than the wind moving between the buildings. The security guards paused, confused by the sudden stillness. The photographers nearby began to notice the tension, their lenses drifting in curiosity toward the entrance steps. Ethan took one step forward, then another. The polished marble beneath his shoes reflected the bright lights overhead. He shrugged off his tailored wool coat without breaking eye contact and crouched down so he was level with the children. Gasps rippled quietly through the small crowd of guests waiting to enter. No one had ever seen Ethan Carlisle kneel for anyone. Yet there he was, holding out the coat like it was the most natural thing in the world. The little girl blinked at him, uncertain, her fingers tightening around the stuffed rabbit. Ethan draped the coat gently over her shoulders anyway. It swallowed her in warm charcoal fabric that still carried the faint scent of cedar from his closet. "You're going to catch a cold out here," he said softly. Naomi looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. "You shouldn't be here," she said under her breath, her voice shaking. "Ethan, please, you don't understand." But Ethan was already standing again, turning toward the stunned security guards and the gathering crowd of guests and cameras. Flashbulbs popped as someone began recording on their phone. The city thrived on moments like this, unexpected drama unfolding beneath expensive lights. Ethan didn't seem to notice the attention. His gaze returned to Naomi, steady and unflinching. "I understand enough," he said quietly. Then, louder this time, his voice carrying across the entrance plaza so that everyone could hear. "These people are with me." The words rippled through the crowd like a sudden shift in the weather. Naomi's eyes widened. The older boy looked up at Ethan with cautious curiosity. Somewhere behind them a reporter whispered, "Wait, does he know her?" Ethan stepped closer to Naomi, lowering his voice again so only she could hear the next words. 8 years, Naomi, he said, his tone calm, but filled with something that had clearly been waiting a long time. 8 years of wondering why you disappeared. Naomi shook her head quickly, panic flashing across her face. This isn't the place for that. Ethan glanced at the children once more, then back at her. His voice softened in a way the crowd had never heard before. Then come inside, he said, because I think the entire city is about to find out why you ran away from me, and who those kids really are. The murmurs began before Ethan and Naomi even reached the doors. Cameras followed them like a swarm of curious fireflies as the crowd parted, unsure whether they were witnessing a scandal, a reunion, or something far stranger. The revolving glass doors of the Grand Atlantic Hotel turned slowly as Ethan guided Naomi and the 2 children inside, the warmth of the lobby replacing the cold air from Madison Avenue. The moment they stepped onto the polished marble floor, the atmosphere shifted. Crystal chandeliers cast soft golden light across the enormous lobby, reflecting off the marble columns and towering arrangements of white lilies placed for the gala. Waiters carrying silver trays slowed their steps. Guests whispered behind raised glasses, and several people discreetly lifted their phones to capture the moment. Ethan Carlisle had just brought a homeless woman and 2 children into the most exclusive charity event in Manhattan. Naomi noticed the stares immediately. Her shoulders stiffened, and she pulled the coat tighter around the little girl who still clutched the stuffed rabbit. The older boy stayed close, his eyes scanning the room with quiet alertness that felt far older than his small frame. Ethan noticed it too. Children who lived easy lives did not watch rooms like that. Claire Bennett appeared almost instantly, moving quickly through the lobby with the calm efficiency of someone used to managing the unexpected. She had been Ethan's executive assistant for 6 years and had seen everything from hostile board meetings to billion-dollar negotiations, but the sight in front of her clearly surprised even her. She stopped just a few feet away, lowering her voice. "Ethan," she said carefully, "the donors are waiting upstairs, and the press has already started asking questions." Ethan barely glanced toward the grand staircase leading to the ballroom. His attention remained on Naomi, whose gaze was fixed firmly on the marble floor. "They can wait," he said quietly. Claire followed his line of sight to the children and instantly understood that whatever was happening here was not a simple act of charity. She nodded once. "I will handle the press," she replied, then leaned toward a nearby staff member and began giving calm instructions that sent the curious crowd slowly drifting away from the center of the lobby. Within minutes the noise softened, replaced by the distant music from the ballroom upstairs. Ethan turned back to Naomi. For a long moment neither of them spoke. 8 years was a long time to carry unanswered questions, and the weight of them seemed to fill the entire space between them. Naomi finally looked up, her eyes tired but still carrying the same quiet strength Ethan remembered from another lifetime. "You should not have done that," she said softly. "All those cameras out there. You have no idea what this could turn into." Ethan let out a slow breath. "I know exactly what it looks like," he replied. "It looks like someone I spent 8 years searching for standing on a cold sidewalk with 2 children." Naomi shook her head quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should not be involved in this." The little girl tugged gently on Naomi's sleeve. "Mom," she murmured, looking up at Ethan with wide eyes. "Is he your friend?" The question seemed to echo in the quiet lobby. Ethan felt something shift deep in his chest. Naomi hesitated before answering, clearly searching for the safest words. He used to be someone I knew," she said carefully. Ethan crouched slightly so he could meet the girl's eyes again. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Ava," she said, still clutching the stuffed rabbit. Ethan smiled faintly. "That is a beautiful name." The older boy studied Ethan silently for a moment before speaking. "My name is Liam." His voice carried a quiet steadiness that caught Ethan off guard. "Nice to meet you, Liam," Ethan said. For a brief moment the tension softened. But Naomi quickly stepped forward again, her expression tightening. "We cannot stay here," she said quietly. "This place, people will ask questions." Ethan straightened slowly. "People have always asked questions," he said. "Tonight they just happen to have cameras." Naomi looked toward the tall glass windows facing the street, where flashes still appeared every few seconds. The city outside was already turning the moment into a story. Ethan could see the fear behind her eyes now, not embarrassment, not pride, but something deeper. "Naomi," he said more gently. "Who are you running from?" She froze. The silence stretched long enough that Ethan could hear the faint ticking of a decorative clock behind the concierge desk. Finally, Naomi shook her head. "It is not safe for you to know that." Ethan held her gaze. "8 years ago you disappeared without saying goodbye," he said quietly. "You left a note that said you needed to protect something. I spent years trying to understand what that meant." Naomi looked away. The little girl leaned against her side, half hidden inside Ethan's coat. Liam stood still beside them, watching everything with that same guarded calm. Ethan glanced between the two children again, the question he had been holding back growing heavier with every second. He did not ask it. Not yet. Instead, he turned slightly toward Claire, who had returned and now stood nearby. "Claire," Ethan said, "please prepare one of the private suites on the 12th floor. Food, warm clothes for the kids, and anything else they might need." Claire nodded immediately. "Of course." Naomi stepped forward again. "No," she said quickly. "We cannot accept that." Ethan looked back at her with the same calm determination he had shown outside. "You are not accepting charity," he said. "You are accepting warmth after standing outside in 40-degree weather." Naomi hesitated. The children looked exhausted now that the adrenaline of the street had faded. Ava's eyes were beginning to droop. Finally, Naomi nodded slowly, though the tension in her posture remained. As they began walking toward the elevators, Ethan heard another whisper ripple through the lobby. Someone had recognized Naomi's name from the cameras outside. Claire glanced toward Ethan and lowered her voice. "The press is already asking who she is," she said quietly. Ethan watched Naomi step into the elevator with the children beside her. The doors began to close. "That," Ethan said softly, "is exactly what I intend to find out." The elevator doors closed with a quiet metallic whisper, sealing Ethan, Naomi, and the two children inside a small glass box that slowly began to rise through the heart of the Grand Atlantic Hotel. The lobby below faded into a blur of marble and gold as the elevator climbed past the first few floors. For a moment no one spoke. The soft hum of the elevator motor filled the silence, and the city lights beyond the glass wall of the shaft flickered in brief reflections across their faces. Ava leaned slightly against Naomi's side, her small hands still buried inside the oversized coat Ethan had placed around her shoulders. The coat nearly touched the floor, and every few seconds she lifted one sleeve curiously as if it were some kind of magical blanket. Liam stood beside them with his arms loosely crossed, watching the elevator numbers change above the door. Ethan noticed how the boy kept glancing at him, not with fear, but with careful evaluation, as though he was quietly trying to understand what kind of man would suddenly step into their lives like this. The elevator chimed softly when it reached the 12th floor, and the door slid open to reveal a quiet corridor lined with thick carpet and warm amber lighting. Claire was already waiting there, standing beside an open suite door. Two hotel staff members rolled in carts carrying fresh towels, folded clothing in several sizes, and trays of food that filled the hallway with the comforting smell of warm bread and roasted chicken. Naomi hesitated at the threshold. She had clearly never stepped into a place like this before. The suite beyond the door stretched wider than most apartments in Manhattan, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, soft cream-colored furniture, and a dining table already set with plates and glasses. Ava's eyes widened instantly. "Mom," she whispered softly, "this room is huge." Naomi gently squeezed her hand. "It is only for tonight," she replied quietly, though her voice carried uncertainty. Ethan stepped aside so they could enter first. The children walked slowly into the room, their sneakers making soft sounds against the thick carpet. Ava wandered toward the window and pressed her hands against the glass, staring at the city lights sparkling far below. Liam moved toward the table where the trays of food had been placed. He did not immediately reach for anything, but Ethan noticed the way his eyes lingered on the warm rolls and the steaming bowl of soup. Claire gave Ethan a subtle glance that said everything without words. The children were hungry. "You can eat," Ethan said gently. "Everything here is for you." Liam looked at Naomi first, waiting for permission. Naomi nodded slowly. The boy carefully picked up a roll and handed it to Ava before taking one himself. The small gesture struck Ethan more deeply than he expected. Even now the boy was thinking of his sister first. Ava took a bite and smiled for the first time since Ethan had seen her outside. "This is really good," she said softly. Naomi watched them eat with a mixture of relief and quiet sadness. She remained standing near the entrance, as though part of her still believed she should not get comfortable in a place like this. Ethan noticed and walked a few steps closer. "You can sit down," he said. "No one is going to ask you to leave." Naomi finally lowered herself onto the edge of one of the chairs, though her back remained straight and alert. Claire approached with a calm smile. "There are clothes for the children in the bedroom," she said gently. "Different sizes, just in case. The hotel store stays open all night, so if they need anything else we can bring it up." Naomi looked at her with quiet gratitude. "Thank you." Claire nodded politely and stepped back toward the hallway, giving the room a little more privacy. Ethan moved toward the window where Ava was still staring at the skyline. "Do you like the view?" he asked softly. Ava nodded enthusiastically. "You can see the whole city," she said. "It looks like 1,000 Christmas lights." Ethan smiled faintly. "It does." Liam finished his roll and wiped his hands carefully with the napkin before speaking. "Are you the man from outside?" he asked. Ethan turned toward him. "Yes," he replied calmly. "My name is Ethan." The boy studied him for another moment. "Mom said you used to know her." Naomi's head lifted immediately, but Ethan answered before she could interrupt. "Your mother and I knew each other a long time ago." Liam nodded slowly, absorbing the information like someone piecing together a puzzle. Naomi finally spoke again, her voice low. "This does not change anything, Ethan. We will leave in the morning." Ethan looked at her carefully. "You still believe you have to run?" Naomi's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. She did not answer right away. Outside the window, the river reflected the lights of passing ferries, long streaks of white moving through the dark water. Finally, she spoke again. "You do not understand the situation." Ethan held her gaze calmly. "Then help me understand it." Naomi looked down at the children, both of whom were now finishing their food quietly. Ava was humming softly to herself, while Liam carefully stacked the empty plates together. The room felt strangely peaceful for a moment, but beneath that calm something heavier lingered between Ethan and Naomi. 8 years of silence did not disappear simply because they were standing in the same room again. Ethan stepped closer to the table and rested one hand lightly against the back of a chair. His voice softened slightly. "Naomi," he said, "when you left 8 years ago you said you needed to protect something." Naomi's breath caught almost imperceptibly. Ethan's eyes moved briefly toward the children before returning to her face. "Tonight, I am beginning to understand what that might have been." Naomi's expression changed instantly. Fear flashed across her eyes, sharp and unmistakable. "Do not say that," she whispered quickly. Ethan did not raise his voice. He simply spoke the quiet truth that had begun forming in his mind the moment he saw the children standing beside her on the sidewalk. "Naomi," he said gently, "how old is Liam?" The room went completely still. The question hung in the air like a fragile thread that no one dared to break. Naomi did not answer right away. Her eyes dropped to the floor, then slowly lifted toward Liam, who was now quietly wiping crumbs from the table with the careful seriousness of a child who had learned to be responsible far too early. Ava had curled into the oversized coat Ethan had given her, sitting cross-legged on the sofa while hugging her stuffed rabbit. The city lights reflected softly through the tall windows, casting long silver lines across the carpet. Ethan waited. He did not repeat the question, but the silence around it grew heavier with every second. Finally, Naomi spoke, though her voice was barely louder than a breath. "He is 8. Ethan felt the number settle into his chest like a weight he had been expecting, but still was not prepared to carry. 8 years. The same number that had been echoing in his mind all evening. 8 years since Naomi had vanished from his life with nothing but a short note that said she had to protect something more important than love. Ethan turned slightly toward Liam again, studying the boy more carefully now. The shape of his eyes, the quiet patience in the way he observed everything before speaking. Even the way he held his shoulders carried a strange familiarity. It was like looking at a memory that had learned how to breathe. Naomi saw the realization forming and immediately stood up from the chair. "Do not do that," she said quickly, her voice trembling now. "Do not start imagining things that will only make this harder." Ethan did not raise his voice. He simply asked the question that had already begun reshaping the entire night. Why did you never tell me? Naomi turned away toward the window, wrapping her arms around herself as if the room had suddenly grown cold again. For a long moment, she stared at the river below, the moving lights of passing boats reflecting across the water. When she finally spoke, her words carried years of exhaustion. Because you were never supposed to know. Ava looked up from the sofa, sensing the tension even if she did not understand it. Liam watched quietly, his eyes moving between Ethan and Naomi as though he could feel the invisible gravity pulling their lives together. Ethan took a slow step closer. You disappeared without a conversation, he said quietly. You left one note and vanished from every place I knew you might go. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. That was the only way. Ethan shook his head slightly. You could have trusted me. Naomi turned around quickly, her voice breaking with emotion she had clearly tried to bury for years. Trust you with what? She asked softly. With the truth that people around you were already trying to destroy everything we had. Ethan frowned slightly, confusion crossing his face. What people? Naomi hesitated again, as if saying the name out loud might bring something dangerous back into the room. The quiet hum of the city outside filled the silence. Finally she spoke. Derek Holloway. The name landed with a quiet shock. Ethan straightened slightly, the calm confidence in his posture shifting into something more focused. Derek Holloway was not just a passing acquaintance. He was a powerful investor, a man whose financial network overlapped with Ethan's companies in several major projects. They had attended the same charity dinners, the same board meetings, the same exclusive conferences where powerful people spoke in polite voices while quietly competing for influence. Derek, Ethan said slowly. What does he have to do with any of this? Naomi let out a tired breath. Everything. Ava slid off the sofa and wandered closer to Liam, instinctively drawn toward her brother when the adults sounded serious. Liam placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, still watching the conversation with careful attention. Naomi continued, her voice steady but heavy with memory. 8 years ago, Derek discovered that you and I were planning to leave New York together. Ethan felt his pulse quicken slightly. He remembered those plans clearly. They had talked about it late one night on the fire escape outside Naomi's small apartment. They had dreamed about moving somewhere quieter, somewhere that did not revolve around corporate deals and endless social expectations. Naomi had laughed that night, saying they could open a tiny bookstore near the ocean and spend their mornings drinking coffee while watching the waves. It had been the last truly peaceful memory Ethan had of her. Derek believed that if you left the city, Naomi continued quietly, you would walk away from several business deals that he had been quietly positioning himself inside. Ethan's expression darkened slightly. So he tried to convince you to leave me. Naomi shook her head slowly. He did not try to convince me. He tried to scare me. Ethan remained silent, listening carefully. Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she spoke the next words. He told me that if I stayed with you, things would begin happening around us that would destroy everything you had worked for. Your reputation, your companies, even your family. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. You believed him. Naomi looked down at the floor again. I was already pregnant. The words fell softly into the room, yet they carried more weight than anything else she had said that night. Ava looked between them curiously, not fully understanding the conversation, but sensing the shift in emotion. Liam remained completely still. Ethan's voice was barely more than a whisper when he finally spoke again. With Liam. Naomi nodded once, tears forming in her eyes despite her effort to remain composed. I thought leaving would protect both of you. Ethan looked toward Liam again, the realization now impossible to ignore. The boy met his gaze calmly, unaware that the quiet moment between them was reshaping the entire story of his life. Ethan inhaled slowly, steadying himself. The past had suddenly returned, and it had brought far more truth with it than he had ever imagined. The words hung quietly in the air, but their meaning felt enormous. Ethan did not move for several seconds after Naomi spoke. The room remained still except for the distant murmur of traffic drifting up from the streets of Manhattan, far below the 12th floor windows. Liam stood beside the table, unaware that the conversation unfolding around him was quietly rewriting the story of his life. Ava leaned against the sofa, tracing circles on the carpet with the tip of her shoe while holding her stuffed rabbit. Ethan slowly lowered himself into one of the chairs across from Naomi. His movements were calm, but his mind was racing through memories that suddenly looked very different. 8 years ago, Naomi had not simply disappeared. She had left while carrying a life he had never known existed. "You were pregnant," Ethan said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. Naomi nodded once, though she could not quite bring herself to look directly at him. "I found out only a few weeks before everything happened," she explained quietly. "At first I wanted to tell you immediately. I even planned the moment." Ethan watched her carefully. Naomi continued speaking slowly, as if each sentence carried the weight of years she had kept silent. "I imagined you standing in your office with that ridiculous view of Central Park, the one you always said you barely noticed because you were too busy working. I thought I would walk in and tell you that you were going to be a father." Her voice softened at the memory. "You would have been happy." Ethan let out a quiet breath. "You have no idea how happy." Naomi looked down at her hands again. "But Derek found out before I could tell you." Ethan's expression hardened slightly at the mention of the name. Naomi continued, her voice steady but tired. "I still do not know how he learned about it. Maybe someone at the doctor's office talked. Maybe someone followed me. But one evening he showed up outside my apartment." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "And he told you to leave?" Naomi nodded again. "He said that if I stayed with you, everything around us would begin falling apart. Contracts would disappear. Investors would panic. The press would begin asking questions about people in your life." She paused briefly before finishing the thought. "He said the easiest way to destroy a man like you was not through business. It was through scandal." Ethan's eyes darkened as he absorbed the words. Naomi looked toward Liam again, her expression softening. "At that moment I was not thinking about money or companies or reputation. I was thinking about a child who had not even been born yet." Ava climbed onto the sofa again and curled up under the coat, clearly growing sleepy now that she was warm and full. Liam quietly carried his empty plate to the table without interrupting the conversation. Ethan noticed how carefully he placed it beside the others. The boy's small gestures carried a quiet maturity that felt both admirable and heartbreaking. Naomi continued speaking. "Derek told me that if I disappeared quietly, he would leave you alone. He said you would be free to build your empire without the distraction of a complicated personal life." Ethan shook his head slowly. "That man had no right to make that decision for either of us." Naomi's voice trembled slightly. "I know that now. But 8 years ago I was scared. I was alone, pregnant, and surrounded by people who knew far more about your world than I did." Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, processing the truth. "So you left before I could even ask you what was wrong?" Naomi nodded. "I thought it was the only way to keep everyone safe." Ethan looked toward Liam again. The boy was now helping Ava climb onto the sofa more comfortably, gently tucking the oversized coat around her shoulders like a blanket. Ethan felt something shift deep inside him as he watched. The quiet kindness between them. For 8 years he had believed Naomi had chosen to walk away from their life together. Now he realized she had believed she was protecting it. Ethan finally spoke again, his voice calm but filled with a quiet certainty that surprised even him. "You spent 8 years protecting that secret," he said. Naomi looked at him carefully. "Yes." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then you deserve to know something too." Naomi waited silently. Ethan turned his gaze toward the city lights beyond the window for a brief moment before looking back at her. "Derek Holloway does not control my life." Naomi's expression tightened with concern. "You still do not understand how far he is willing to go." Ethan gave a small, thoughtful smile. "No," he replied quietly. "I think I understand him much better than he realizes." Naomi studied him carefully, sensing the confidence in his voice. The same confidence that had allowed Ethan Carlisle to build one of the most powerful investment networks in the city before the age of 40. But beneath that calm strength, there was something else now. Something personal. Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table. "There is something else we need to talk about," he said gently. Naomi felt a sudden tension return to her chest. "What?" Ethan glanced briefly toward Liam again before returning his attention to Naomi. His voice remained steady, but the question he asked carried the weight of everything that had happened that night. "If Derek believed your leaving would protect me," Ethan said quietly, "why are you hiding again now?" Naomi did not answer Ethan's question immediately. The silence that followed seemed even heavier than before, because now the past was no longer a mystery between them. It had a name, a reason, and a consequence standing quietly across the room in the form of an 8-year-old boy carefully helping his younger sister settle deeper into the couch. Naomi finally drew in a slow breath, as if gathering the courage to say something she had hoped never to say out loud. Because he never stopped watching, she said quietly. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. Derek. Naomi nodded. For years I believed that once I disappeared he would forget about me. I moved from city to city. Boston, then Cleveland, then Denver for a while. Every time I thought life was finally becoming stable again, something strange would happen. A landlord would suddenly raise the rent after someone called asking questions about me. A job offer would disappear without explanation. Sometimes people would approach me asking if I used to live in New York. Ethan listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with every word. Naomi continued, her voice steady but filled with exhaustion. At first I told myself it was coincidence. But after a while the pattern became too clear to ignore. Someone always seemed to know where I had been before. Ava shifted slightly on the couch, half asleep now, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Liam quietly adjusted the coat around her shoulders, then turned his attention back toward the adults. Ethan noticed how the boy did not interrupt, did not fidget, simply listened with the quiet patience of someone who had spent years learning how to read the mood of a room. Naomi continued speaking softly. Eventually, I stopped trying to build anything permanent. We stayed in smaller towns, cheaper apartments, places where no one asked too many questions. I worked wherever I could. Diners, grocery stores, cleaning offices at night. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. And all that time you believed Derek was behind it. Naomi hesitated before answering. I still believe it. Ethan stood slowly from the chair and walked toward the window, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the glass as he looked down at the glowing lines of traffic far below. Manhattan moved with the restless energy it always had. Thousands of lives crossing paths beneath the towers of steel and glass. 8 years ago, he had believed he understood how power worked in this city. Now he was beginning to realize that someone else had been quietly manipulating pieces of his life, without him even knowing. Behind him, Naomi continued speaking. The worst part was not the running, she said quietly. It was the fear that one day Liam would start asking questions I could not answer. Ethan turned back toward her. Naomi's eyes had drifted toward her son now. He is smart, she said softly. Smarter than I expected for his age. He notices things. He asks why we move so often. Why I never keep old photographs. Why we do not talk about the past. Liam lowered his gaze slightly, clearly aware that the conversation involved him even if he did not fully understand it. Ethan walked back toward the table, his voice calm but thoughtful. And Ava? Naomi gave a faint, tired smile. Ava was born 3 years later. By then I had already accepted that our life would always be temporary. Ethan looked toward the small girl sleeping under his coat. The sight stirred something deeply protective inside him. You have been carrying all of this alone, he said quietly. Naomi shrugged gently. It was my decision. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, it was a decision you made because someone forced you to believe it was the only option. Naomi did not argue with that. Instead, she looked back toward him with quiet seriousness. Which is why we cannot stay here, she said softly. The moment Derek learns that I appeared at your event tonight, he will start asking questions again. Ethan remained silent for a moment, considering everything she had told him. The city lights flickered across the room in the reflection of the windows. Finally, he spoke again. Naomi, there is something about Derek Holloway you may not know. She watched him carefully. What? Ethan folded his arms slowly, the calm confidence returning to his posture. For the past 2 years, several of my companies have been quietly reviewing irregular financial movements connected to investment groups that Derek controls. Naomi frowned slightly. What does that mean? Ethan's expression was calm, but focused now. It means Derek has been moving large amounts of money through shell partnerships in ways that would attract serious attention if anyone looked closely enough. Naomi's eyes widened slightly. You are investigating him. Ethan gave a small nod. Not openly. But yes. Naomi felt a new tension tighten in her chest. Then this is even more dangerous than I thought. Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady and certain. Or it means something very different. Naomi waited. Ethan glanced briefly toward Liam and Ava before finishing his thought. It means Derek may have spent 8 years believing he controlled the story of our lives. Naomi felt her breath catch slightly. Ethan met her eyes with quiet determination. But he never realized that one day the truth would walk straight back into the same city where he started it. Naomi stood very still after Ethan spoke, as if the room itself had shifted beneath her feet. For years, she had believed the story of her life was simple, even if it was painful. She had believed she ran away, protected her child, and survived quietly in the corners of cities where no one looked too closely. But Ethan's words suggested something very different. It suggested that the man who had once frightened her into disappearing might now be standing on much weaker ground than she had ever imagined. The quiet suite felt smaller now, filled with the weight of possibilities Naomi had never allowed herself to consider. Outside the tall windows, the lights of Manhattan stretched across the river like a field of stars, but Naomi barely noticed them. Her eyes stayed fixed on Ethan. "If you have been investigating him," she said slowly, "then tonight changes everything." Ethan nodded slightly. "Yes, it probably does." Naomi's hands tightened around the back of the chair beside her. "You do not understand what he is capable of when he feels threatened." Ethan's expression remained calm, but there was a steadiness in his posture that had not been there earlier in the evening. "Naomi, men like Derek only appear powerful when no one challenges them." Naomi shook her head softly. "You did not see the way he spoke to me 8 years ago. He did not sound like someone bluffing." Ethan considered that quietly. The room was peaceful for the moment. Ava was now completely asleep, curled beneath the oversized coat with her stuffed rabbit pressed against her cheek. Liam sat beside her on the couch, his small shoulders leaning against the armrest as he watched the adults with thoughtful eyes. Ethan noticed again how alert the boy seemed even when he was tired. It was the kind of awareness that came from growing up in uncertain places. Ethan walked slowly toward the sofa and lowered himself into the chair nearby so that he was closer to the children. Liam glanced up at him, cautious but curious. "Is my sister going to stay asleep?" the boy asked quietly. Ethan smiled faintly. "She looks comfortable. I think she will sleep for a while." Liam nodded, satisfied with the answer. After a moment, he asked another question. "Are we staying here tonight?" Naomi hesitated before answering, but Ethan spoke gently before she could. "Yes. You are safe here tonight." Liam seemed to study that statement carefully, as if weighing whether the promise could be trusted. Finally, he nodded again, and leaned back against the couch, though his eyes remained open. Naomi watched the exchange silently. Something about the calm way Ethan spoke to Liam seemed to soften the tension in her shoulders. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to sit down again instead of standing near the door like someone preparing to leave. Ethan turned back toward her. "There is something you need to know," he said quietly. Naomi waited. "Derek has been losing influence over the last year," Ethan continued. "Several investors have begun distancing themselves from his partnerships." Naomi frowned slightly. "Why?" Ethan folded his hands together thoughtfully. "Because certain financial patterns are beginning to look suspicious." Naomi felt a slow chill move through her chest. "Suspicious how?" Ethan's voice remained steady. "The kind of patterns that regulators and investigators do not ignore once they see them." Naomi looked toward the window again, absorbing the implication. For 8 years Derek had seemed untouchable, a man whose connections reached into places she could not even see. Now Ethan was suggesting that those same connections might be unraveling. "If that is true," Naomi said slowly, "then he will become desperate." Ethan nodded once. "Possibly." Naomi looked back at him. "And desperate people make dangerous decisions." Ethan did not argue with that. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, his attention returning briefly to Liam and Ava before focusing on Naomi again. "Which is exactly why running again will not solve anything." Naomi's eyes searched his face. "Then what do you think will?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "The truth." Naomi let out a quiet breath. For years, she had hidden that truth in order to survive. Revealing it now felt almost unimaginable. "You are talking about exposing everything," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "Yes." Naomi glanced toward Liam again, the protective instinct returning immediately. That would put him in the center of it. Ethan's expression softened slightly as he followed her gaze. "No," he said gently. It would finally give him the protection he deserved 8 years ago. Naomi remained silent, weighing the idea against the years she had spent trying to stay invisible. The room felt quiet again except for the distant sound of traffic far below. Finally, she spoke in a low voice. If Derek learns that Liam is your son, he may try to use that against you. Ethan met her eyes calmly. Then it is time he learns that I am no longer the man he thought he could control. Naomi studied him carefully. The Ethan standing in front of her now was not the young man she had known years ago on that fire escape in Brooklyn. Time had changed him. Responsibility had sharpened his instincts and strengthened his confidence. Yet beneath all of that she could still see the same quiet kindness in the way he looked at Liam and Ava. Naomi slowly nodded. You really believe the truth could end this? Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced once more at the sleeping girl beneath his coat and the boy sitting protectively beside her. Then he looked back at Naomi with quiet certainty. I believe the truth is the one thing Derek never expected us to use. Naomi remained quiet for a long time after Ethan spoke, the idea of truth lingering in the room like a door she had never dared to open. For 8 years, survival had meant silence. It had meant keeping Liam and Ava safe by making sure no one knew where they came from or who their father might be. Now Ethan was asking her to do the opposite. He was asking her to stop hiding. The city outside the window moved with the restless rhythm of midnight traffic, headlights gliding across bridges and avenues while distant sirens echoed through the urban canyon of glass towers. Naomi slowly stood from the chair and walked toward the window, wrapping her arms around herself as she looked down at the glowing streets far below. I spent years trying to make sure no one could find us, she said quietly. And now you are telling me the only way to protect them is to let the entire world know who they are. Ethan did not respond immediately. He watched Liam for a moment instead. The boy had finally leaned back against the couch, though his eyes were still open. Ava slept peacefully beside him, her small hand still gripping the stuffed rabbit as if it were the most important possession in the world. Ethan felt a deep sense of responsibility settle over him as he looked at them. He had lost 8 years without even knowing why. Now the future of those same years stood quietly in front of him. Naomi, he said gently, the reason Derek was able to frighten you before was because you were alone. She turned slightly toward him. I was not alone. I had Liam. Ethan nodded slowly. Yes, but you did not have anyone who could stand beside you in the world Derek lives in. Naomi understood what he meant. For years she had survived in places far away from boardrooms and corporate deals. She had avoided the powerful networks of people who quietly influenced entire industries. Derek had existed in that world, and Ethan had built it. Naomi took a slow breath. Even if you are right, Derek will not simply step aside. Ethan gave a small, thoughtful smile. I would be disappointed if he did. Naomi frowned slightly. You sound like you expect a confrontation. Ethan folded his arms calmly. Not expect. Prepare. Naomi watched him carefully, realizing how much he had changed since the young man she once knew. The Ethan she remembered had always been intelligent and ambitious, but the man standing in front of her now carried a quiet, strategic confidence that came from years of navigating complicated battles in the business world. What exactly are you planning to do? She asked. Ethan walked slowly back toward the table and sat down again, resting his hands together thoughtfully. First, we allow tonight to unfold naturally. Naomi raised an eyebrow slightly. Naturally. Ethan nodded toward the window. Half of Manhattan already knows that I brought a woman and 2 children into the gala tonight. By morning, the entire financial press will be discussing it. Naomi felt a wave of nervous energy return. That is exactly what I was afraid of. Ethan shook his head gently. It is also exactly what Derek will be watching. Naomi slowly began to understand. You want him to notice. Ethan gave a small nod. Very much. Naomi turned fully toward him now. You are turning this into a message. Ethan's expression remained calm. Yes. Naomi crossed her arms again. And what message would that be? Ethan glanced briefly toward Liam before answering. That I am no longer interested in hiding from the truth of my own life. Naomi looked at the sleeping Ava, then back at Liam, who was quietly watching the conversation. The boy's eyes met Ethan's again, curious but steady. Something about that calm gaze made Ethan feel even more certain about what he was doing. Naomi spoke again softly. If Derek believes you are challenging him publicly, he may respond quickly. Ethan nodded. That is the idea. Naomi shook her head slowly, half in disbelief. You are using yourself as bait. Ethan smiled faintly, only in a very controlled way. Naomi walked back toward the couch and gently adjusted the coat around Ava's shoulders again. For a moment, she simply watched her daughter sleep. Then she looked at Liam, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. How long will this take? She asked quietly without looking up. Ethan considered the question carefully. If Derek is as nervous as I believe he might be, we will probably hear from him within 24 hours. Naomi exhaled slowly. And if you are wrong? Ethan met her eyes calmly. Then we take the next step ourselves. Naomi sat down beside Liam now, the boy leaning slightly against her shoulder. What would that step be? Ethan's voice lowered slightly, the words carrying quiet certainty. Then we tell the entire story before anyone else has the chance to twist it. Naomi looked at him carefully. For 8 years, she had hidden her past in order to protect her children. Now Ethan was suggesting that revealing everything might finally end the fear that had followed them from city to city. Liam shifted slightly beside her. Mom, he said quietly, is everything going to be okay? Naomi looked down at him, her expression softening instantly. She placed her hand gently over his. Yes, she said softly. Across the room, Ethan watched them both, and for the first time that night he allowed himself to believe that the future might finally be moving in the right direction. The night moved quietly past midnight, but inside the suite the air still carried the feeling that something important had begun. Naomi remained seated beside Liam on the couch, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, while Ava slept peacefully under the oversized coat. For the first time in many years, Naomi allowed herself to sit still without thinking about the next city, the next cheap apartment, or the next temporary job that would keep them moving unnoticed. Across the room, Ethan stood near the window again, his eyes scanning the river of headlights moving across the bridges below. He had spent most of his adult life thinking several steps ahead, but tonight the future had suddenly become personal in a way he had never experienced before. 8 years had passed without him knowing that a part of his life had been growing quietly somewhere else. Now that part was sitting 10 feet away from him on a hotel couch, eating warm bread and trying to stay awake past midnight. Ethan turned slightly when he heard the soft vibration of his phone against the table. The screen lit briefly in the dim room. Claire's name appeared across the display. Ethan picked it up and stepped a few feet toward the hallway so his voice would not disturb the children. Claire, he said quietly. Her voice came through calm but focused. The story is already moving through the media networks, she explained. Several financial reporters posted photographs from outside the hotel about an hour ago. They are asking who the woman and children are. Ethan glanced back toward Naomi before answering. What are people saying? Claire paused briefly. Mostly curiosity for now. Some people believe you simply helped a family in need outside the event. Others are speculating that the woman may have some kind of personal connection to you. Ethan nodded slowly, even though she could not see him. Good. Claire sounded slightly surprised by the response. Good. Ethan smiled faintly. Exactly the kind of attention we expected. Claire lowered her voice slightly. Then you should know something else. Ethan waited. Someone from Derek Holloway's office contacted one of the event organizers 30 minutes ago asking questions about what happened tonight. Ethan's expression did not change, but his voice carried quiet confirmation. That was fast. Claire continued speaking calmly. The call ended quickly, but the organizer told me Derek sounded very interested in the details. Ethan glanced toward Naomi again. She was watching him now, sensing the importance of the conversation even from across the room. Thank you, Claire, Ethan said quietly. That is exactly what we needed to know. After the call ended, Ethan returned to the living area. Naomi studied his face carefully. He already knows, she said softly. Ethan nodded once. Yes. Naomi felt a small knot tighten in her chest. For years Derek's attention had meant trouble. Yet Ethan's calm reaction made the situation feel strangely different this time. What did he ask? She said quietly. Ethan sat down across from her again. He asked who you were. Naomi let out a slow breath. Then it begins. Ethan leaned forward slightly. No, he corrected gently. It already began the moment we walked through the hotel doors tonight. Liam shifted slightly beside Naomi, his eyelids finally beginning to grow heavy. He fought to sleep for a moment before speaking softly. Mom, he murmured. Are we in trouble? Naomi immediately brushed her hand gently through his hair. No, she said quietly. Everything is going to be all right. Ethan watched the moment carefully. For years he had negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars without feeling his pulse change. Yet seeing Liam look up at him with quiet trust stirred something much deeper than any business risk ever had. Ethan spoke gently, so the boy could hear him clearly. You are not in trouble, Liam. In fact, tonight might be the first night in a long time when you do not have to worry about anything. Liam studied his face for a second before nodding slowly. The reassurance seemed enough for him. Within moments his eyes finally closed, and his breathing softened as he leaned against Naomi's shoulder. The room became quiet again except for the distant hum of the city outside. Naomi looked down at her son and then back at Ethan. You realize Derek will not stop with a phone call, she said softly. Ethan nodded calmly. Of course. Naomi's voice remained steady but concerned. He will try to control the narrative. He will try to make this look like something else. Ethan's expression remained thoughtful. That is why we will speak first. Naomi frowned slightly. Speak first. Ethan reached for the tablet lying on the coffee table and tapped the screen lightly. Within seconds, several news articles appeared showing blurred photographs from outside the gala entrance. The headlines were already forming questions. Ethan turned the screen toward Naomi so she could see. By morning these questions will be everywhere, he said quietly. Naomi stared at the screen, feeling the strange mix of fear and relief that came with seeing her hidden life suddenly moving into the open. Ethan placed the tablet back down gently. Which means tomorrow we stop hiding, he said calmly. Naomi lifted her eyes toward him again. The decision felt enormous, but the exhaustion of 8 years of running had finally begun to outweigh the fear. Outside the window, the first hint of pale light was beginning to appear at the far edge of the sky above the river. Dawn was approaching, and for the first time in nearly a decade, Naomi realized that the new day might finally bring answers instead of more running. Morning arrived quietly over Manhattan, the pale gold light of early sunrise spreading across the river and reflecting through the tall windows of the hotel suite. For a moment the room looked almost peaceful, as if the long night of revelations had been nothing more than a strange dream. Ava still slept curled under Ethan's coat, her stuffed rabbit tucked against her cheek, while Liam rested beside Naomi with his head leaning gently against her shoulder. Naomi had not slept at all. She had spent the last few hours sitting quietly on the couch, listening to the steady breathing of her children while watching the sky slowly turn from black to blue beyond the glass. 8 years of running had taught her to stay alert even when the world appeared calm. But something about the stillness of the room made the tension feel different this morning. It was no longer the fear of being discovered. It was the awareness that hiding was about to end. Across the room, Ethan stood near the window again, already dressed in a simple dark shirt and trousers he had asked the hotel to deliver during the night. He had been awake for hours as well, reading through messages and news alerts that continued appearing across his phone. The story had grown larger while the city slept. Several financial websites were already discussing the mysterious woman seen entering the gala with him. The photographs showed Naomi holding Ava's hand while Liam walked beside her beneath the bright lights of the hotel entrance. The images had spread faster than Ethan expected, but he did not seem concerned. If anything, he looked quietly focused. Naomi noticed the look on his face and stood slowly from the couch, careful not to wake the children. She walked toward him, stopping a few feet away near the window where the sunrise painted the room with soft amber light. How bad is it? She asked quietly. Ethan handed her the phone without speaking. Naomi looked at the screen. Headlines and speculation filled the page. Some articles described Ethan as a generous businessman who had helped a struggling family outside his event. Others were already asking whether the woman had a deeper connection to him. Naomi felt a familiar wave of nervousness pass through her chest. This is exactly what Derek would want, she said softly. Ethan shook his head slightly. Not exactly. Naomi looked up from the phone. What do you mean? Ethan rested his hands on the edge of the window frame and looked down at the city waking below them. Derek prefers control, he said calmly. He likes to move quietly through conversations and influence people behind closed doors. Naomi returned the phone to him. Then why would he let this story spread? Ethan gave a small, thoughtful smile. Because he probably believes he can still turn it into something useful for himself. Naomi frowned slightly. How? Ethan looked at her directly now. By suggesting that you appeared last night to manipulate me. Naomi felt a sharp breath catch in her throat. He would say that. Ethan nodded. Yes. Naomi crossed her arms slowly, thinking through the possibility. Then you are right, she said quietly. He will try to control the story before we can. Ethan's voice remained calm. Which is why we will speak first. Naomi studied his face carefully. You really plan to tell the entire truth today? Ethan did not hesitate. Yes. Naomi glanced toward the couch, where Liam and Ava still slept. The thought of bringing their lives into the public filled her with both fear and relief at the same time. For years, she had hidden their past in order to keep them safe. Now Ethan believed that same truth could protect them instead. Naomi walked slowly back toward the couch and gently brushed Liam's hair away from his forehead. The boy stirred slightly, but did not wake. Ava shifted under the coat, hugging the stuffed rabbit closer. Naomi felt her heart tighten as she looked at them. If we do this, she said quietly without turning around, there will be no way to take it back. Ethan walked a few steps closer. I know. Naomi stood there for another long moment before finally nodding. Then we do it. Ethan felt a quiet sense of certainty settle over him. The decision had finally been made. Before he could speak again, his phone vibrated once more in his hand. The screen lit up with a new message from Claire. Ethan opened it quickly. Naomi watched his expression shift slightly as he read. What is it? She asked. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. Claire just confirmed something, he said calmly. Naomi waited. Ethan met her eyes. Derek Holloway has just scheduled a press conference this morning. Naomi felt the tension return immediately. He is moving first. Ethan nodded once. Yes. Naomi's voice grew quiet. Then he already knows exactly who I am. Ethan looked back toward the rising sunlight over the river. His voice remained steady when he spoke again. Which means he also knows that today the truth finally becomes impossible to hide. The news broke less than an hour later. Screens across Manhattan lit up with the same headline as Derek Holloway stepped behind a polished podium in a sleek conference room overlooking downtown. The cameras flashed in quick bursts while reporters adjusted their microphones, sensing the tension that always followed a public appearance from one of the city's most influential investors. Derek stood perfectly composed, his suit immaculate, his expression calm in the way powerful men often practiced before speaking to the world. Back in the hotel suite, Ethan watched the live broadcast on the television mounted against the wall, while Naomi stood beside him with her arms folded tightly across her chest. The children had finally woken a few minutes earlier. Ava sat cross-legged on the couch, still wrapped in the coat, quietly eating a bowl of fruit that hotel staff had delivered with breakfast. Liam sat beside her, watching the screen with curious eyes as the cameras focused on Derek. Naomi noticed how Ethan remained completely still while Derek began speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, Derek said smoothly into the microphone. Thank you for gathering on such short notice. I believe it is important to address certain rumors that began circulating last night regarding an unexpected situation at a charity event. Naomi felt her pulse quicken. She had not seen Derek in 8 years, but his voice still carried the same polished confidence she remembered from that night outside her apartment. Derek continued calmly. Many of you have already seen the photographs showing a woman and 2 children entering the event with Mr. Ethan Carlisle. Unfortunately, some people have begun speculating about the nature of that relationship. Ethan did not look away from the screen. Naomi noticed the small shift in his posture, the quiet focus of someone who had spent years studying his opponents carefully. Derek paused. For a moment, allowing the reporters to lean forward slightly. Let me be clear, he continued. I have reason to believe that the woman in those photographs approached Mr. Carlisle under false pretenses. Naomi felt a wave of anger rise in her chest, but Ethan raised a calm hand slightly, as if asking her to wait. Derek's voice remained steady as he continued speaking. In the business world, we occasionally see individuals attempt to take advantage of successful people by creating emotional stories designed to attract sympathy and financial support. Liam looked up from the couch, confused by the tone of Derek's words even if he did not fully understand them. Naomi's hands tightened into quiet fists. Derek went on. While I cannot comment on every detail, I believe Mr. Carlisle is simply the latest target of such manipulation. The reporters in the room immediately began shouting questions. Derek lifted one hand slightly to quiet them. My only goal in addressing this situation today is to protect the reputation of a respected business partner who may not yet realize the nature of the circumstances he has encountered. The broadcast continued with flashes of camera lights and raised voices from the press, but Ethan reached for the remote and quietly turned the television off. The room fell silent again. Naomi stared at the blank screen, her heart still pounding. "He did exactly what you said?" she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes." Naomi looked at him, frustration and disbelief mixing in her voice. "He is telling the world that I am lying." Ethan walked calmly to the table and picked up his phone. "He is telling the world the version of the story he hopes they will believe." Naomi crossed the room toward him. "Then what do we do now?" Ethan met her eyes with quiet certainty. "Now we respond." Naomi felt the weight of the moment pressing down around them. For years Derek's voice had been the one that controlled the narrative. Now Ethan was preparing to challenge it publicly. "How?" she asked softly. Ethan glanced toward Liam and Ava, making sure they were comfortable before answering. "We do it carefully," he said. "And we do it with the truth." Naomi exhaled slowly. "He already moved first." Ethan nodded. "Yes, but he also made a mistake." Naomi frowned slightly. "What mistake?" Ethan held up the phone in his hand. "He forced the story into the open sooner than he planned." Naomi watched him carefully. Ethan's voice remained calm but confident as he continued. "That means every reporter who watched his press conference is now searching for the other side of the story." Naomi slowly began to understand. "Our side." Ethan nodded once. Naomi glanced toward the couch where Liam and Ava were sitting quietly together, the boy whispering something to make his sister smile. The sight strengthened her resolve. For years she had protected them by staying invisible. Now she realized protection might finally mean standing in the light instead. Ethan began typing a message quickly on his phone. Naomi waited until he finished. "Who did you send that to?" she asked. Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Claire." Naomi raised an eyebrow slightly. "And what did you tell her?" Ethan looked back toward the window where the city stretched endlessly in the morning sunlight. His voice remained steady when he answered. "To call every major news network in New York." Naomi felt her breath pause. "You are going to speak publicly." Ethan nodded calmly. "Yes." Naomi glanced once more at the children and then back at him. "And what exactly are you going to tell them?" Ethan met her eyes with the same quiet determination he had carried all morning. "Everything Derek hopes no one will ever hear." The ballroom of the Grand Atlantic Hotel had been transformed in less than an hour. Where the charity gala had stood the night before, rows of cameras now faced a simple stage at the front of the room. News networks from across the city had arrived quickly once Claire Bennett made the call. Reporters filled the chairs, whispering to each other while technicians adjusted lights and microphones. The energy in the room carried the electric tension of a story that had suddenly become larger than anyone expected. Naomi stood near the back of the ballroom beside a tall column, watching everything with quiet disbelief. Less than 12 hours earlier, she had been standing on a cold sidewalk with her children, hoping no one would notice them. Now the most powerful media voices in New York were gathering in the same room to hear the truth she had hidden for 8 years. Liam and Ava were upstairs in the suite with Claire, who had promised Naomi she would keep them comfortable and distracted until everything was finished. Naomi had agreed, though every protective instinct inside her still pulled her toward the elevators. Across the room, Ethan stood near the stage speaking quietly with one of the network producers. He looked calm, almost relaxed, but Naomi could see the sharp focus in his eyes. This was a different kind of negotiation than the business deals he usually handled. Today the stakes were personal. A low murmur moved through the crowd when Ethan finally stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent almost immediately. Dozens of cameras tilted forward as reporters raised their microphones. Ethan adjusted the microphone once before speaking. His voice carried clearly through the ballroom, steady and controlled. "Good morning. I understand many of you have questions about what happened last night outside this hotel." A few reporters leaned forward, pens ready. Ethan continued calmly. "Before I answer those questions, I want to address something said earlier this morning by Mr. Derek Holloway." Naomi felt her pulse quicken at the mention of the name. Ethan did not raise his voice, but the confidence in his tone filled the room. "Mr. Holloway suggested that a woman and 2 children approached me under false pretenses." Several cameras zoomed in closer. Ethan paused briefly before continuing. "That statement is not only incorrect, it is also deeply misleading." The reporters began scribbling quickly. Naomi watched from the back of the room, her hands clasped together as she listened. Ethan spoke again. The woman who entered the hotel with me last night is Naomi Brooks. She is not a stranger. She is someone who has been part of my life for a long time. The room stirred with quiet interest. Ethan continued without hesitation. 8 years ago, Naomi disappeared from New York suddenly. At the time, I did not understand why. I believed she had chosen to walk away. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly as the memories returned. Ethan's voice softened slightly as he continued. What I learned last night is that she left because she believed she was protecting something important. A reporter raised his hand, but Ethan continued speaking before any question could interrupt. What she was protecting was a child. Naomi felt her breath catch as the words echoed through the ballroom. Ethan looked directly into the cameras. That child is named Liam. A wave of quiet murmurs moved through the reporters. Ethan allowed the reaction to settle before finishing the sentence that would change everything. And Liam is my son. The room erupted with overlapping questions and camera flashes. Ethan raised one hand calmly, waiting for the noise to settle. Naomi stood frozen at the back of the ballroom. The truth she had hidden for so long, now spoken openly to the entire city. Ethan continued speaking once the room grew quieter again. Naomi did not leave because she wanted to. She left because someone convinced her that disappearing was the only way to protect our child. The reporters leaned forward again. That person was Derek Holloway. The tension in the room grew instantly. Ethan's voice remained steady. 8 years ago, Mr. Holloway used fear and manipulation to influence a decision that affected the lives of 3 people who should never have been involved in his business ambitions. Naomi felt the weight of the moment press around her. Ethan was not simply defending her. He was exposing the truth she had carried alone for nearly a decade. Ethan finished calmly. Today I am telling this story because no family should ever feel forced into hiding simply to protect themselves from the influence of someone more powerful. He paused briefly before adding the final sentence. And because the truth deserves to be heard before it can be twisted into something else. The reporters erupted with questions again, but Naomi barely heard them. Her eyes remained fixed on Ethan as the reality of what had just happened settled over her. For 8 years, she had believed silence was the only way to survive. Now the truth was standing in the center of the room, impossible for anyone to ignore. The ballroom remained loud with questions long after Ethan finished speaking, but he stepped away from the microphone with the calm certainty of someone who had already said everything that mattered. Reporters continued calling his name, cameras flashing rapidly, yet Ethan simply gave a brief nod to the moderator before leaving the stage. Naomi was still standing near the column at the back of the room. Her heart beating so loudly, she felt as if everyone around her could hear it. For 8 years she had carried the truth alone, protecting it like a fragile secret that could shatter the moment anyone touched it. Now that truth had been spoken out loud in front of the entire city. Ethan walked toward her through the crowd of reporters who were already rushing to file their stories. When he reached her, he stopped for a moment, studying her expression carefully. Naomi did not speak right away. Her eyes were bright with emotion she had tried for years to keep hidden. You did not have to say all of that, she said quietly. Ethan shook his head gently. Yes, I did. Naomi glanced toward the stage where journalists were still discussing the announcement in excited voices. Everything is going to change now, she said softly. Ethan followed her gaze for a moment before answering. Some things needed to change a long time ago. Naomi looked back at him, searching his face for any sign of regret, but there was none. Instead, there was only the same steady determination she had seen since the moment he stepped off the sidewalk and recognized her the night before. Derek will not ignore this, she said quietly. Ethan gave a small, thoughtful smile. He cannot ignore it anymore. Naomi understood what he meant. For years, Derek had been able to operate quietly behind the scenes. Now his name had been spoken in front of cameras and reporters who would not stop asking questions until they had answers. Naomi exhaled slowly, feeling the strange mixture of fear and relief settle inside her. For the first time in a long while, she admitted softly, I do not feel like running. Ethan looked at her with quiet warmth. Good. Naomi hesitated before asking the question that mattered most to her. What happens now? Ethan considered that for a moment before answering. Now we go upstairs. Naomi blinked slightly, surprised by the simplicity of the response. Ethan continued calmly. Liam and Ava are probably wondering why their mother disappeared into a ballroom full of reporters. Naomi allowed a small smile to appear. They are used to strange mornings by now. Ethan shook his head gently. Maybe they should not have to be anymore. Together they walked toward the exit of the ballroom. The reporters were too busy discussing the announcement to notice them, leaving quietly through a side hallway. The elevator ride back to the suite felt different from the night before. Naomi could feel the weight of years slowly lifting from her shoulders, even though the future remained uncertain. When the elevator doors opened, on the 12th floor, Claire was waiting in the hallway. She looked relieved when she saw them. "The children are inside," she said softly. "They finished breakfast and have been asking when you would come back." Naomi nodded gratefully before stepping into the suite. Liam was sitting near the window with a glass of orange juice, watching the river below. Ava was drawing something on a sheet of paper at the table. Both children looked up immediately when Naomi entered. Ava ran across the room and wrapped her arms around her mother. "You were gone forever," she said dramatically. Naomi laughed quietly and lifted her into a hug. "Only a little while." Liam stood up slowly, his curious eyes moving between Naomi and Ethan. "Did something important happen downstairs?" he asked. Naomi glanced toward Ethan for a brief moment before kneeling down so she could look directly at her son. "Yes," she said gently. "Something very important." Liam waited patiently, the same thoughtful expression on his face that Ethan had noticed the night before. Naomi reached for his hand. "You remember how I always told you that sometimes people hide the truth because they are trying to protect the people they love?" Liam nodded. Naomi smiled softly. "Today we decided it is time to stop hiding." Liam looked between her and Ethan again, slowly absorbing the meaning behind her words. Ethan stepped forward and rested a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "And that means we get to start learning about each other properly," he said quietly. Liam studied him carefully before asking a simple question. "Does that mean you are going to be around now?" Ethan met his eyes with complete sincerity. "Yes," he answered. The boy considered that answer for a moment before nodding slowly, as if accepting a new piece of his life that had just fallen into place. Ava tugged on Ethan's sleeve suddenly. "Are you staying for lunch too?" she asked. Ethan laughed softly. "I think that can be arranged." Naomi watched the moment unfold in front of her, the sunlight from the windows filling the room with warmth. For years she had believed the only way to keep her children safe was to stay invisible. Now she realized that sometimes safety came from standing in the open with people who refused to let you face the world alone. Outside the windows, Manhattan continued its busy morning, unaware that inside a quiet hotel suite a family that had been separated by fear was finally beginning to find its way back together.